Spyros Economides, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, given the Greek public is going to the polls again for the second time in as many months, what's the mood like among the electorate?
Well, I think there's a great degree of uncertainty because nobody's clear as to what the result of this election will be. On one level, we don't know who's going to win on Sunday. The two parties who have been leading into the polls in the last 2 weeks are neck and neck. The centre-right New Democracy and Syriza, the radical left party. And also, even though we don't know who's going to win, whoever wins, we don't know what the next day is going to bring. So the Greek electorate is facing a double uncertainty of not knowing what the future is going to bring either domestically or in its relationship with Europe.
With those two leading parties there, New Democracy and Syriza, with Syriza in particular saying, look, we want to reject the austerity program, but we want to remain in the Eurozone, and at the same time, some of the fellow Eurozone members are saying, it doesn't work like that. You have to stick to what's agreed, otherwise the bailout money is cut off. Just how difficult will it be for voters when they go into that ballot box and stand before it and go, do we really want that money to be cut off if I vote for Syriza?
Well, I think what we have to really understand is that there are a large number of Greeks who are suffering tremendously, not only from the austerity programs of the last 18 months and the reform packages that have been demanded alongside the bailout loans that have been given, but also because Greece has been in recession for 5 years now. It's lost almost 20% of its GDP. 22% of the population are unemployed. So there are a lot of Greeks who are simply looking for salvation. And they will vote for anybody, like Syriza, who comes along and makes highly unrealistic claims about being able to put the economy on the right track without actually having the support of the European Union. Or, if remaining within the Eurozone, getting rid of all the conditions that the European Union has put on Greece to receive this money. So it is a dilemma for a large part of the Greek population because they are being offered something which is a lifeline to them.
But as you just said, these are unrealistic claims being put to them by the party. How potentially dangerous is that, politically and socially?
Well, I personally think it is very, very dangerous because it is based on unrealistic premises. Essentially what Syriza are doing, and they've got a great degree of popular support, which cannot be ignored, don't get me wrong. What essentially they're doing is doing a kind of bravado politics, where they are trying to call the bluff of the European Union. The basic underlying premise of Syriza is that if we win and can form a government, we will go to Brussels and essentially say to the European counterparts, and mainly Germany, you cannot afford to allow Greece to leave the Eurozone. So you will meet our conditions, keep paying into our coffers, and we will carry on with different policies from the ones you want to carry out, because otherwise we will leave the Eurozone and the Eurozone will crumble, and that's not something you can afford. That is the basic promise of this electoral campaign that Syriza is conducting.
Well, indeed, this election has been called a referendum in some respects about the country's membership of the Eurozone. How much in the electorate's mind do you think that is the case?
Well, I think in the last few weeks we've seen this dramatic shift in people's perceptions about what is going on. And essentially the New Democracy Party, which is the other main contender in this election, and which seems to be 1 or 2 or perhaps even 3 percentage points ahead according to the latest polls, has made this a referendum about Greece remaining in the Eurozone. Now, of course, this is also a very difficult thing for them to do because they will have to go back to the European Union and say, look, if we are able to form a government, you have to give us something in return so we can convince the Greek people that staying in the Eurozone is indeed a good thing. And it seems that in the last few days, what the European Union is willing to concede is that if New Democracy does win and is able to form a government, which is a big if, then the European Union will consider releasing some of the tight constraints that have been put on the Greek economy if Greece remains within the bailout reform path. And this is a big question which remains hanging over the whole process.
Spyros, let me look at another, what seems from here at least, a dangerous element in this election, the far-right Golden Dawn Party. Now, it did comparatively well in the May election. How is it likely to go this time, especially after particularly that shocking display last week by one of its spokespeople during a TV debate, slapping one woman candidate and throwing water at another?
Well, this is, again, there's a great degree of uncertainty here. I think most people will agree with what you've just said, that considering what has happened in the last week and the performance of the press spokesman of the party on national television, one would expect the support of this far-right party to deflate somewhat. But the opinion polls indicate that its support has been maintained, and that it's not deflating as radically as one would have wished necessarily. And I think this comes down to basically that there are Greeks who are suffering tremendously, as I said before. There's a degree of destitution among urban Greeks, which has led them to seek solutions in radical parties, whether it's the radical parties of the far right or perhaps the radical parties of the far left. People are being driven to extremes because of the negative economic conditions which pervade Greek society and which have been in place now for the best part of 3 years.
Seeking solutions or looking for someone to blame, because it seems as though there is growing social unrest and it's targeting the migrant population in Greece. There's been a surge in attacks on migrants, which has in some respects been attributed to some of the Golden Dawn's policies and statements. So that doesn't sound like solution. That sounds just like very dangerous venting.
It is very dangerous venting, and throughout the process of this crisis in the last 2 or 3 years, Greeks, unfortunately, have found the solution they seek in terms of venting. And the venting takes a very nasty form when it comes to immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal, and this is pervading the whole political system, because even the more mainstream parties have had to come out with suggestions that they will deal with the illegal migration problem. But there's also a further venting which is also disconcerting, and that's the venting that's taken place against outsiders and against the Germans in particular, a form of Greek nationalism which has tended to blame the Germans for all the ills of the Greek economy while absolving vast parts of the Greek society of their involvement in what has happened in Greece in the last 20 to 30 years. And this venting, of course, is born from a sense of frustration, but it's also an escapism which doesn't necessarily provide any solutions to the contemporary problems that Greece is going through.
Spyros, there have been reports of many Greeks withdrawing money from banks ahead of the weekend elections, fearful the country could leave the euro. What do you think Greece would look like economically and socially if it does return to the drachma?
I think Greece is stuck between a rock and a hard place. If it continues in the current austerity path, the reform path, which I think is what it has to do to bring the immense benefits that it could do in the long term, it still faces hardship in the near future. The alternative, the return to the drachma, I feel will bury Greece under an economic misery, if you like, for the next generation. A return to the drachma does not make Greece competitive immediately, because Greece has to actually be competitive and productive in something before it can become an exporter of produce. It's going to be, I think, a situation where we'll see mass unemployment, higher than now, mass inflation, and the destruction of the hopes and aspirations of a whole generation of Greeks.
So, with that scenario, irrespective of who wins this weekend, what's the likelihood of even a semblance of political stability?
I think we're looking at a rather tough period in terms of political and social stability in Greece. If the New Democracy Party, the centre-right, manages to win, I think Syriza and its supporters will descend on the streets of Greece in mass protest and opposition. If Syriza were to win and form a government and ultimately withdraw Greece from the Eurozone, I think the economic catastrophe which would engulf Greece would be disastrous.
Dr. Spyros Economides, thanks very much for your time and your perspective tonight.